and welcome to another violin video lesson. I'm Matt and thanks for tuning in. Today I want to talk to you about how to do the spiccato stroke. And so for those of you who already know how to do the spiccato stroke, perhaps I can give you a couple of tips just to refine it and to hopefully get you more in a relaxed way to do this bow stroke. And so first of all, maybe we'll best talk about what is actually a spiccato stroke. So you might have seen some players on the violin that do this bouncing motion on the string that goes something like this. And so that's actually the spiccato stroke. And so you would have heard a lot of pieces and music that may have had spiccato stroke, and you're probably wondering, how do you actually do it? And so when it comes to spiccato, it can be a little tricky to start off with, or it can be actually just tricky to do well, because there's a very specific technique in order for you to play spiccato very effectively and also to get a really good sound. So first of all, I want to say that spiccato is a type of staccato. So a staccato is a short and detached note. And on the violin, there's actually a number of ways we can play a staccato. So you might have seen before on the string staccato that goes like this. Yeah, and so that's actually called a martelé stroke. And spiccato stroke is, I just showed you before, a bouncing stroke that bounces on the string. There's also another one called sautier. Sautier, French word, and it's a very quick and very, very rapid sort of staccato stroke. So something like that. And so, but today we're going to talk about spiccato. And so how do we get started playing spiccato? So first of all, we need to be in the right part of the bow when we do spiccato. There are other places you can do it, but the best way to get the most relaxed and efficient sound is near the natural point of the bow. Now every bow has a natural balance point, where if I were to balance my finger at that point, just be careful not to drop your bow, you'll find that that's actually balancing. And you notice that it actually isn't found or located directly in the middle of the bow as well, which some students actually may assume. Because if I put it in the middle, it actually drops onto the right side. But the balance point is here. So you might just have to find where that is on your bow, and every bow is slightly different, so you do need to figure out where it is on your bow and just try to find where the bow will balance on your finger. And so once you found that, so my one is around here, this is where I like for you to begin the spiccato stroke. And so the second thing I need you to understand is that the motion of the spiccato is just a little bounce of the bow hair onto the string. Now there are some things to take note of. Firstly is just to feel how springy the bow hair is. Why do I need you to do this? Because what happens with a lot of students when they play spiccato is they start doing this. And what's wrong with that? You're just using so much effort and so much unnecessary movement to create the spiccato that it just doesn't sound good, and it's probably not the most efficient way to play. So your job is to find the most minimum amount of effort and movement in order for us to create the spiccato stroke. And the way to do that is firstly just to feel how springy the bow hair actually is. So if I were to just bounce up and down, and this is what I'll get you to do as well, just bounce up and down on the string just like this. So don't intentionally make any sound, just bounce up and down. You're gonna find that it just springs right back up to you really easily, just like that. Okay? And notice that I'm actually not using a lot of movement. Okay, I'm not going side to side just yet, but notice that it's really just my hand that controls how much bounce there is going off the string. So it's very, very little bounce. You're probably just wanting to bounce probably about 2 centimeters or so off the string. And that's something you can also adjust according to the music. But for now, let's just get a good spring off the violin. Just roughly about 2 centimeters off the string. Okay, and then once you've done that, then you can try and go a little side to side. So what you're trying to create is just little smiley faces or U shapes, okay, when you're bouncing, so that the bottom of the U shape is the part that brushes the string. And when you maintain that bouncing effect, that's the spiccato stroke. And just watch that I'm actually not using a lot of shoulder when I do this. So I'm not doing this. Because if you do that, then again, I just mentioned that there's a lot of unnecessary force that just goes into the string. Now some players can actually make it sound good, but I'll tell you, it just gets very exhausting if you were to play spiccato stroke like this. And so if you were to just make sure that only the hand and the wrist are the main sources of your movement here. So you're just bouncing. Again, if you just get a little out of control, just bounce on the string again like this. And then go back to side to side. And here are some tips just to refine the spiccato stroke as you're doing it. So one tip is to actually tilt the bow, and when you're tilting, just make sure that the wood goes away from you and not towards you, so away from you. And do your spiccato stroke like this. That's a good tip to generate a more, I guess in a way, a more brushier sound, a more warmer sound when you're doing spiccato, as opposed to something that's just a little bit more crisp and a little bit more percussive. And that's something also about spiccato is it depends on the type of sound you're wanting. So if you want something a little bit more light and delicate, you might want to go for something a little bit more horizontal with that U shape we mentioned, right? So you're more brushy in terms of your effect. Now also if you want a more percussive sound and something a little bit more articulative and a little bit more, just a bit more choppy in a way, then you want more of a narrower U shape, or even some ways it's kind of like a V shape, and you're gonna get this very percussive sound. So I'll show you the difference. So here's a more V shape. And here's a more rounded U shape. So here's an exercise that you can do with your spiccato stroke. So once you do get the hang of being able to just do this on the open string, add some fingers to it, maybe something like a simple scale, and maybe a couple of bounces per note. So you're just really focusing on the bow stroke, but adding some fingers to it as well. So maybe 4 times every note on a D major 1 octave scale, something like this. And as you're doing it, you really want to feel the bounciness of the bow against the string and not feel like you have to force it. A good example about using too much effort when it comes to getting something to bounce is just use bouncing a ball as an example. So let's say if you're bouncing a tennis ball or a basketball and you're just shoving it into the ground really hard, it's just very unnecessary for the ball to come back up to you. If you were just to give a little bit of a push and let the ball bounce back up, that's just a much better technique and a better way for the ball to come back up to you. So shoving it into the ground is just very unnecessary in terms of the effort and the force that you're putting in. So the same thing with the spiccato. If we're are using a lot of shoulder, we're actually putting in a lot of unnecessary effort. So we actually want to minimize that by actually using the technique in our fingers and our wrist to create the spiccato stroke. Alright, so I hope you got some valuable tips there on how to do spiccato. The main thing is that you break it down in those steps and then try to get the spiccato stroke going and then maintain it as naturally as possible. Anyways, that's the start of being able to do the spiccato stroke. So do take some time to practice this and do some exercises. If you like some more videos and some more advanced tips, then check out my other videos as well. Otherwise, do subscribe, like the video, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.